This is again for Neil O'Neill. I guess I misunderstood your question a little bit. See, I suppose the thrust of my question was to understand the way you comprehend the direct, unmediated relationship between man and nature. Reason being that I think most people, certainly the ones I mix with, feel most religious when alone with their thoughts and the raw wilderness. Perhaps it accounts for the intensity of exile in both the religious and psychological senses. Again, very insightful comment. Um, Yeah, a lot of people see. This is one of the differences between normative Judaism and like let's say Buddhism or a lot of Eastern disciplines. While we do spend a lot of time, or some people, some Jews do spend a lot of time in what's called meditation, something called Dveikus in Judaism, which is a sort of spiritual ecstasy where you try as much as possible to devoid yourself of the physical reality and to become closer with your Maker. Also, you should know, with the Baal Shem Tov, he was actually trained in a forest. His father passed away at 5 years old, and the legend, the rumor that his adherents at least believe is that a prophet named Machia Shaloni would come to him in the woods. He was an invisible prophet, and he would teach him the Torah. And this is how he learned the ways of Chassidus and Kabbalah, which he later went on to become the father of Chassidus and Mal Chassidim. And in those days, many times they would retreat into the woods, people. And what it does is it obviously gives you a sense of the infinite nature of your Creator, and also harmony and balance. You notice that the woods, even, and the more you leave them alone, the better they operate. They don't need human interaction. They don't need our input. And chances are, when we do get involved in things like the woods and nature, we only usually come to make it worse, to somehow pollute it or to upset the natural balance that's found there within. But generally, the relationship, it used to be seen a lot more in the old days, but now we've developed to a certain point where nature, it can still harm us whenever we want. And this is something I think that's taken for granted a lot of times because it's usually in the middle of tragedy. But it says like an animal won't attack a person unless he deserves it. And nature is something, the animals are things which have no free will, as it were. They just basically act off of what scientists call intuition. But in the religious doctrine, they're just like angels. They just carry out the will of their Maker all day long. And if you deserve to be mauled by a lion, then you'll be mauled by a lion. Nowadays we have guns and we can protect ourselves, but and this is something you can never bring up at the time. But in retrospect, things like the tsunami, which is a horrific event, loss of so many lives, and even Hurricane Katrina in these United States, again, loss of a lot of lives and a lot of destruction in the southeast. These are things that clearly happen by God's command, and these are things, God's in His infinite kindness decided to make the universe in an interactive way, where you're able to learn lessons about your service to God through what happens in what we call nature. In Judaism, you should know that the gematria, the numerical value of Hateva, which is the nature, is the same as Elokim, without the kuf, with the hey, Elo. It's one of the names of God we don't say unless we're saying it, in our liturgy or something like this. And what's the rationale? The explanation is that God has enclosed Himself in nature, as it were. And so this is something a scientist finds very obvious, that you could look at the natural order of the world and you could take God totally out of the picture. You can say these are systems that have always been in place. You can kind of sidestep the question of original matter, okay, and original causation, and just say this is the way things are now, and there's really no God. But a religious person or a spiritual person looks at the world and says, everything that happens in nature is happening for me to learn a lesson about my service to my Maker, or about the nature of myself, my own character traits, or my interpersonal relationships. This is something that it says in a book called Yom Yom, which is written by the Rebbe. He collected sayings from the previous Rebbe. He said in the times of the Baal Shem Tov, in the times of the Alter Rebbe, many generations ago, there was a time that every single thing that happened to a person, that transpired to him, either that he heard about or he saw or experienced somehow in the world of nature and in the world around him, was simply meant as a lesson for him in divine service. But the beginning of my statement, what I was going to say is, even though this is a good way to learn about, and this is a good way to feel more in tune with spirituality, the ultimate goal of Judaism is to be spiritual within groups of people, and to encourage other people to be spiritual. This is the charge to the Jewish nation. I want you to be a light unto the nations. We're only 1 out of 70 nations, according to the way the Torah counts the nations, although now it could be more than 70 nations, I would think. But our charge is to be a light unto them, to try to imbue them with spirituality, and to try to get them to stay focused on spiritual pursuits. And this is actually something that other religions have come and other peoples have come and also are similarly focused to get people to be more transcendent in their thinking, to avoid at all costs warfare and bloodshed and violence and rape and things that are clearly opposed to godliness and godly revelation in this world, and to get them instead to focus more on transcendent goals like being more spiritual and helping and charity and loving kindness and good deeds and things like this. But yeah, it's interesting. You end up with a note. Perhaps this accounts for the intensity of the exile, both in religious and psychological senses. This is something that you'll find most true. The more you choose to isolate yourself, I think this is your point, to isolate yourself in your own little wilderness, the more you'll feel a personal exile. As a human being, our nature is to be social, is to interact, is to be one with other people. And the more you choose to isolate yourself, even for good reasons, for good purposes, the more you'll become isolated and you'll have a experience of exile. There's a story of a famous Jewish rabbi, the Rashbi, Rab Shimon Bar Yochai. He authored the book called the Zohar, which is, he said, with this book we'll leave galut with rachmim, we'll leave exile with mercy. So how did he author this book, and under what pretense, under what conditions? He was in the times of the destruction of the temple, and he swore that he would never forgive the Romans for destroying the temple, and he damned them in effect. And they put a bounty on his head. They said, okay, if that's the case, we're going to come kill you. So he hid with his son in a cave. He was there for 12 years. According to legend, how did he survive if he lived in a cave? There was a spring that provided him water, and there was a carob tree every day that would provide him food. Either he did a little bit of the carob, or every day magically a new carob would appear mystically. I don't know exactly how. But during this time, he authored the Zohar. When he left the cave after 12 years, he heard a voice from heaven say, the same Roman emperor that wanted you dead has now been replaced, and this guy doesn't have a bounty on your head. You can come out of the cave, Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. So he comes out of the cave, and right away he sees a man working on a field, a Jewish person. And he says his glance burned the entire field. He couldn't understand. He had just been immersed solely in the world of Torah, solely in the world of meditation and learning. And not only that, within learning the most esoteric parts of our wisdom, the Zohar would be called later the real pnimis, the internal aspect of Torah. And he couldn't understand how someone could engage in physical mundane labor. So his son told him, let's go back into the cave. And they went back into the cave, and they stayed there another year. And his son, it seems, or he anyway, got the message that yes, there's a part of life where you're supposed to be introspective, and you're supposed to meditate, and you're supposed to be connected to your Creator. But if you can't apply this to everyday situations, to the real world, then what's really the point? And when he left the cave, he says, not only did he not burn fields with his vision, but he would help people in their mundane tasks and their physical pursuits. And this was his repentance of sorts. This showed that he now respected the concept of working in the world, working in the physical reality, and working with other people. So I hope this more addresses your question and comments. I think you really make me think, and I really like your comments very much. Thank you so much, and God bless.